getting close to it. Yeah, there's about 20 seats free each side there. There's plenty of people standing around.
To really hear the candidates out. They are now pretty well versed in going around the country. So this is your chance. You will have the opportunity to put some questions to them. I know there are some set questions. I've got them all here. But if we have time, and we should do, I'll make sure that we go to the floor as well. So if you have any questions for the candidates, please think of them now. Perhaps make them pertinent to what you've just heard from them. And someone will race around with a microphone and we'll try and come to you as well. As for the format, very similar to the other hustings if you've been taking those into account as well. The candidates go one after the other. We'll kickstart things with one of the candidates coming up and doing a speech, and then there'll be an interview section with me, and then we go to the Q&A with all of you. But before we hear from both candidates, I'd like to invite Andrew Sharp, the chairman, I should say, of the National Convention, I'll get your title right eventually, who would like to address you.
Thank you very much indeed, Hannah. I'm Andrew Sharp, as Hannah said, Chairman of the National Convention. It's an honour and a privilege to welcome you to this, as Hannah said, the 12th of the 16 physical hustings that we're having around the country. And it's great to see so many people here. Hannah said that the country is looking to us to make a sensible decision, but they're of course also looking at us. And it's worth remembering that this process has actually been very good for our party. You'll have seen plenty of positive media commentary about previous hustings. The quality of questions has been highlighted as spot on in some cases. And the candidates have both expounded an attractive vision of a post-Brexit Britain that is global in outlook, pro-business, pro-free enterprise, tolerant and optimistic. This exercise is therefore helping dispel some of the traditional media narrative about us and our party. Although, of course, that's not true of all the old lefty hangouts. You know, some of them still insist on trying to do hatchet jobs on us, as we saw in Channel 4 on Monday. And I note that recently the New York Times described us, would you believe, as a fanatical sect. Sect, perhaps, I don't know. In this, the centenary year of the Conservative Women's Organisation, they should be perhaps celebrating some of our more progressive achievements, starting with animal sentience as far back as 1824, would you believe? And don't forget, of course, Mrs. Pankhurst herself was a Tory. Now, the party that I and my National Convention officers know, and there are two here tonight, James Pearson and ACB, the one that we see every week as we travel around the country is made up of engaged and engaging men and women of every faith, colour, age and sexual preference. They're united, we're united by our belief in our country, our institutions, in an unshakable tradition of public service. And of course, we all have an admirable commitment to campaigning in all weathers. I've never met anyone in our party who cares where you come from. We only care where you're going. And we mustn't forget there's far more that unites us than divides us. As Lord Hailsham said, conservatism is not so much a philosophy as an attitude, a constant force, performing a timeless function in the development of a free society. And as Hannah said, we're here to undertake a solemn duty as part of that commitment to a free society, because we're not just electing a new leader, but we're electing a Prime Minister. So the country we love would expect us for this process to be rigorous, and Hannah is here to make sure that's the case. We need a Prime Minister who will deliver Brexit, but also beat our political opponents. So we made the case at the party board that the leadership campaign had to be across every part of the country, and every member should have access to at least one hustings. There was no disagreement on this point, and at this moment I'd like to thank our chairman, the Right Honourable Brandon Lewis MP, for his support, but also for his support more generally for the Voluntary Party. I'd also like to thank the ops and conference teams at CCHQ. Organising this has been a mammoth undertaking, as you can imagine. And so, in particular, to Tom Skinner and David Comerford, who lead those teams, thank you. And finally, can I thank your regional chairman, Ajaz Ahmed, who's in the front row here. I've worked closely with Ajaz for many years now, and he is a tireless campaigner and advocate for the South East, and you're very lucky to have him. Before I hand over, can I ask one further favour? You will have seen on your chairs some literature about the Campaign Managers Programme. It's pretty straightforward, this. Where we have campaign managers, we do well. Where we don't, we do less well. So if you could please read that and perhaps get yourselves involved with it, that would be very much appreciated. And don't ignore the buckets that will be being waved on your way out. That's it from me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Enjoy this event and make sure your questions are spot on. Thanks.
Andrew, thank you. Now the chairman of the Conservative Party, Brandon Lewis, would like to speak to you.
Good evening. And if you're just wondering for a moment where those flyers that Andrew mentioned are, that he said were on your chairs, I have a public service announcement. They're not. You're quite right. But when you leave, trust me, you know, we haven't got a raffle tonight, I'm afraid. I know we should have. But as Andrew said quite rightly, there will be buckets, and the team will have some literature and information for you about the campaign managers. Backing up the point that was on the screens if you saw when you came in. Those campaign managers are hugely important for us as a party. They help us make sure we are ready to campaign, to make sure we're ready to hold seats like Hastings with Amber, and to win back seats like Canterbury that we absolutely must win to ensure that we prevent Corbyn from ever getting near Downing Street and returning a majority Conservative government. So please do look hard and think about what you can do to help support another campaign manager. I also just want to say while we're here, a huge thank you to all my colleagues. There's a lot of members of Parliament here tonight. I'm sure everybody has put in their note to my great deputy, Helen Whately, to let her know we're in her constituency tonight. But a huge thank you to everybody for coming. Andrew Sharp is absolutely right. We have gone all over the country. Our two brilliant candidates have gone to all of the 4 nations, and we will have been, by the end of this process, in every single region as well. And in doing that, our party, I think all of us across the Conservative family, have shown what a fantastic party we are. Both from us as members, asking some phenomenal questions, no pressure, but you've got to keep it up tonight, but also from our candidates, who you will hear from tonight in the sure knowledge that we're not just voting for and choosing the next leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party, but the next Prime Minister. And both of them you'll hear from tonight will be outlining, I think, have consistently done over the last few weeks, a phenomenal vision for the future of our country that shows people across the country that it's the Conservative Party that has got the determination, the enthusiasm, the vision and the ideas to deliver for our country in the future. So please enjoy that part of this evening. I look forward to hearing the questions you've got for our candidates. And just before I hand over, I want to say a huge thank you to Hannah Vaughan-Jones, who's our host tonight. This is the last of the hustings that Hannah is hosting. She's done a series of these for us, including a first of its kind, which was the online live hustings. It's had over 100,000 views so far. So from all of us, Hannah, thank you for joining us for these hustings. For me, have a good evening. Enjoy the hustings. Good questions. I'll hand back to Hannah.
Thank you very much. Right, the first candidate up tonight is Boris Johnson. So before we hear from the man himself, let's hear from his campaign team.
Nice to see you. Hello, good morning. Hello. Yes, of course you can. If I get in, we'll come out deal or no deal on October the 31st. Good man. We'll do that. Thank you very much. Would that make you come back and vote Conservative again? Yes. That's the spirit. Yes. But we've got to have the courage to tell the people of this country that we can do it if we really want to. And that's the only way, actually.
And you're the only person that can do that.
A lot of teachers are telling me that they feel that the funding per pupil isn't high enough. We need more police that's out there, but sometimes I think we need...
More visibility, I think.
And stop and search?
Yes.
Totally with you.
I'm scared because my daughter used to live in London as well.
Yeah.
She's at university.
Safe big city it was when I used to run it. I can tell you we got crime down by 20%, we've got the murder rate down.
Like Mr. Khan off, but it's not good.
But I also think we need to be supporting the wealth creators in the business sector, because otherwise you're not going to have the dosh to invest. Right. Cut some taxes and you'll get more money in. Would you normally think of yourself as a Conservative voter, would you say?
No.
No? Ever? Can I ask you a terrible question? Would you consider voting for me?
Yes.
If there is one lesson from that referendum of 2016, it is that too many people feel left behind, that they're not able to take part fully in the opportunities and success of our country. That's why now is the time to unite our society and unite our country, to build the infrastructure, to invest in education, to improve our environment and to support our fantastic NHS, to lift everyone in our country, and of course also to make sure that we support our wealth creators and the businesses that make that investment possible. Now is the time for us to believe in ourselves and what we can do. And that's why I am standing to be leader of the Conservative Party.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Boris Johnson.
Afternoon. Hannah. Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you very much, Hannah. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everybody. Fantastic to be here in Maidstone, and absolutely wonderful to see you all here tonight in such huge numbers. I think it's the biggest one we've had, Hannah. Absolutely extraordinary. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. The race is hotting up, folks, and it's getting obviously closer to the end, but we have a huge job to do as a party, and I tell you what, I don't know about you, but I hear an awful lot of gloom and pessimism about our party. People point out that we're down at in the early 20s in the polls, and they point out that we got only 8.8% in the recent European Parliament elections. I think I've ever known our party get as low as 8.8%. But I tell you what, I think we can turn it round, and I think we're going to come back and we're going to win. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to do three things to make sure that we win. Number one, we're going to get Brexit done by October the 31st. That's the first thing. And there are three ways. And first of all, we are going to look after the 3.2 million EU nationals here in this country, which we should have done ages ago. To be perfectly honest, we're going to put their rights into law. Then we're going to take that the fabled 39 billion, which is quite a lot of money, and I think probably slightly more than the EU expected, and we're going to suspend it in a state of creative ambiguity over the talks until such time as we get the answer that we want. And then, of course, we're going to take the complex issues of the Northern Irish border and frictionless trade, all of which are eminently soluble, by the way. I've just actually been to Dover to see how they can be solved. And we're going to solve them where they logically belong in the context of the free trade agreement that we're going to do with our friends and partners after we come out on October the 31st. Isn't that the right thing to do? Yes, it is. That's what we do. And we simultaneously prepare for what is absolutely sensible and practical in these situations. You prepare to come out without a deal. You prepare, if you have to go for a no-deal exit, if it is absolutely necessary. And we can do it, can't we? We're a great country. We're an absolutely great country. We can prepare and we can get ready. And I know that there are people who say that the planes won't fly and there won't be clean drinking water. And I've heard that there won't be enough milk solids and glucose and whey to make the Mars bars in Slough on which our children depend. And I have to tell you, I think it's absolute nonsense. I prophesy this, we'll do a great deal. We'll do a great deal by getting ready for it to come out of that deal. But whatever happens, under all circumstances, I prophesy that the planes will fly and there will be clean drinking water in Maidstone and the whole of the great garden of England, the whole of the south, there'll be clean drinking water, and we will have sufficient glucose and milk solids and whey to make Mars bars, because where there's a will, there's a way, ladies and gentlemen, as I never tire of saying in this You were bracing yourselves for that one, that punchline. And then we get on, and by the way, in Dover, they're totally confident. Well, the confidence of the people who are running the Dover Port Authority is in sharp contradistinction, I may say, with some of the gloom that has emanated from certain quarters of our party. Well, you know, let me say, the political establishment over the last 3 years. We can do it. We will do it. They told me in Dover they imported, you know, there are 120 billion worth of trade. 30% of the bananas eaten in this country come through Dover. Did you know that? 30% of them. And they told me, yes, we will have bananas under all circumstances after November the 3rd. November the 1st. So we can do it, and we will do it. And then we get on with the vital work of relaunching our great conservative brand and our party and bringing our country together. And if I want to sum up in a sentence what I would like to do as leader and as Prime Minister, it is to unite our country in the way that we were able, when I was Mayor, to unite London. And very briefly, when I started as Mayor, I had 4 of the 6 poorest boroughs anywhere in the UK. We ended up with none of the poorest 20 anywhere in the UK. And we did it by fighting crime. We brought down crime a long way. We had massive transport infrastructure investments, and we boosted education and technology of all kinds. And that is what we need to do across the whole of the UK. Raising education funding, putting in fantastic transport infrastructure. I'd like to be the Prime Minister who does for Northern Powerhouse Rail what we did with Crossrail, who does for the West Midlands what we did with the upgrades to the Tube. And by the way, shouldn't we be doing some vital road improvement programmes here in the Garden of England? And what about dualling the A2, for instance? Springs to mind. All those things. And furthermore, it is a disgrace that this great country, which pioneered the World Wide Web, should be able to provide its citizens with only 7% coverage of full fibre broadband, whereas in Spain they have almost 90%. How pathetic is that? We can do it. We're going to radically accelerate the timetable for full fibre broadband so that everybody gets the coverage that they need, and no more manana culture here in the UK about broadband. And how do people say, how will you pay for this? How will you do it? And all these investments in education, in infrastructure, in broadband, of course, you know, they will cost a little bit. It's all perfectly costed, but they will cost. But what they will do is, of course, they will give business the confidence to invest and to grow across the country, relieving the pressure, by the way, on London and the South East. And you pay for it by backing business and by backing the wealth creators and the entrepreneurs and the business community of this country. And there's one character, or at least there's several of them, who don't understand business, who have no love, nor care, nor interest in wealth creation, and you know who they are, my friends. It is Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and that finally is the threat that we must dispose of. We must make absolutely sure that guy who not only backs Hamas and Hezbollah, but who would raise inheritance tax, pensions tax, corporation tax, income tax to 50p in the pound, he would put up a garden tax. Is anybody here from Sevenoaks? He would put up there you go, I've told the people of Sevenoaks he would put up a garden tax so that Sevenoaks have to change its name to Three Oaks as a result of Jeremy Corbyn's depredations. We cannot let him anywhere near the government of this country. We can't. Well, are we going to let him anywhere near the government of this country? No, we certainly are not. And I would just point out to you, the last time I was called upon to defeat an emanation of the London Labour left, considerably wilier and more devious than Jeremy Corbyn, we came from behind and we defeated Ken Livingstone when our great party, the Conservative Party, was 17 points behind in the polls. We did it then, we can do it again. With your help, we will. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Boris Johnson, welcome.
Hannah, thank you.
Do you accept that your refusal to give Sir Kim Darroch your full support on Tuesday prompted his resignation?
I rang Kim, I think yesterday, and said how much I regretted his resignation, which indeed I do. And he, I think, was the victim of a very unpleasant stunt by somebody who tried to, and succeeded in, leaking his confidential diptels, which are intended to guide ministers and the government about his thoughts about what's going on in Washington. And I think it was absolutely disgraceful that those diptels were leaked, and I think it's vital, and as I said to Kim, and I say to everybody, that all our civil servants, all great ambassadors such as Sir Kim, should feel free, should be able to speak without fear or favour to their political masters, and then it is up to their political masters to decide what to do with it. And I think whoever leaked those diptels, deserve to be hunted down and prosecuted.
But why didn't you give him your full support
on
Tuesday?
I give him my full support.
You didn't on Tuesday. You've been accused of throwing our top diplomat under a bus.
Well, I must say that I think that there has certainly been an attempt to politicise this issue and to take the career prospects of Sir Kim and turn them into an issue in the Conservative Party leadership contest. I notice that. What I will say is that I don't think that should happen. I don't think that, and as I said in the debate, I don't think that issues of personnel in our civil service should become footballs in political conversation. And just as the advice that civil servants give to ministers should be sacrosanct, and ministers should not reveal it and should not betray it.
As Prime Minister, would you ever criticise President Trump?
Not only have I criticised President Trump, but I criticised him as Foreign Secretary. You will recall that we in the UK do not agree with the position of the United States on global warming, on the Paris Treaty on climate change. We don't agree with their approach to that. We didn't agree with the United States in their approach to the Iran nuclear deal. And we were very robust with the US, and we'll continue to be robust with the US. But I must say that there are reasons for thinking that our relationship with the United States is the single most important strategic fact of the 20th century, and indeed of our times. You think about 20th century history, America coming in 2 world wars, saving Europe in the way that they did. It was the fact of Britain's closeness with the United States that was absolutely decisive in ensuring that outcome. I think people in this audience tonight would expect the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to want to have a close working relationship with whoever is in the White House, and that is certainly what I will have, and indeed already have.
And you've talked a lot about your close relationship with Donald Trump, but I'm wondering what would constitute or what would bring about your Hugh Grant Love Actually moment when Britain stands up to the big American bully.
Well, you've probably forgotten this, Hannah, because it was all so long ago. But when I was Mayor of London, I seem to recall that after we'd got crime down a long way, you may recall, in London. We got it down 20%, we got the murder rate down 50%, not something you can fudge. And I think the President said something disobliging about crime in London. Does anybody remember this? It's floating back into my head.
President Obama?
No, President Trump, not President Obama. President Trump said something disobliging about crime in London, not wishing to visit certain parts of London. And I'm afraid I said that there were certain parts of New York that I wouldn't wish to visit for fear of meeting President Trump, which probably got me. But that was then. And I think if the President is a man who can deal with that kind of thing, he understood that he was saying something about the city I love and I represent, and you've got to. The UK will stand up for the UK interest. The UK will stand up for, and I will stand up for our fantastic diplomats across the world. I just don't think that their careers should be used as political footballs, that's all.
So John Major has said that he would seek a judicial review to prevent you from proroguing Parliament, if necessary.
Yes, is this the same John Major who prorogued Parliament in order to avoid? Can it be he? Is this?
Does the possible legal wranglings
is this
make
the same
October
John Major
31st?
who decided to delay prorogue Parliament in order to avoid investigation into
I'm wondering, though, if the threat of legal wranglings make the deadline date of October 31st even more fanciful than perhaps before.
There's a serious... I don't think it's fanciful. Does anybody here think it's fanciful? It's not fanciful. March, we were meant to come out on March the 29th. We were meant to come out on April the 8th. Actually, everybody was ready more or less on March the 29th. We could have done it. We will be ready on October the 31st, and we've got to get on and do it. And I'll tell you, the profound issue here is that I think that politics has changed since March the 29th. And what people understand is that huge numbers of people, hundreds of thousands of voters, have migrated away from our party, not your party necessarily, Hannah, but our party to the Brexit Party or to the Liberal Democrats, both of which are like giant puffballs feeding saprophytically on the decay in trust in politics. And the only way to prick those puffballs is to get Brexit done and move on with our exciting, progressive, modern, conservative agenda. That is what people want. And I think MPs on both sides of the House now understand the really mortal threat that we face. And so I don't think, so when John Major talks about proroguing and all this sort of legal wrangling and what have you, and you say I don't think that, I think actually that common sense is breaking out. And I'm delighted to see Amber in the audience there. I saw Amber say something, she's trying to hide now, but it doesn't matter. I saw Amber say something rather commonsensical today as well about the importance of having no deal as part of our army. That's been government policy, as far as I can remember, for the last 3 years. So look, let's go forward together. Let's get this thing done. And I think that is really where MPs are going to want to end up. They're going to want to do the right thing by their constituents.
Tuesday at the televised debate, you made reference to the forthcoming election. Do you have a time frame in mind for a snap election?
No, there will be, no, of course not. There will be eventually an election in 2022. But before then, what we must do is get our great party ready again. We must fill our coffers flush with cash. We must put out, once again, with greater power and clarity and conviction, our belief in modern one-nation conservatism, the symmetry that I've talked about between backing wealth creation and fantastic public services and a great NHS and all the rest of it. That is the balance at the heart of what we want to do. And as I say, it's a winning formula. Jeremy Corbyn only believes in one half of it. He only understands the public sector unions and higher tax and higher spending. We understand that you need to support wealth creation and that there's a moral good and a moral value in supporting enterprise and families and people who get up early in the morning to get their shops and their businesses ready, because they are actually creating the wealth on which the whole of society depends. Well, and Corbyn has no interest in that.
The whole of society, thank you. The whole of society had a chance, finally, to hear from both of you at the televised debate on Tuesday. It was quite boisterous, it was rowdy. I mean, were you riled by the nature of or the tone?
Not remotely. I don't remember being riled. Riled?
You weren't then?
I wasn't really riled.
How would you describe your own temperament?
I would say irenic. I almost approaching a state of almost glutinous harmony with my fellow conservatives. I genuinely think one of the reasons I'm the right person to unleash on this project now is that I'm lucky enough to have the support of MPs across our party. And if you look at what happened in the end in the party in Parliament, I got more than half the party behind me, dozens of Remainers and Leavers, and that, I'm very, very proud of that. But more importantly, more people are still joining in. And what we want to do is to reach out, to embrace everybody, and I will listen and think and do everything I can to bring our party together again, because there are some brilliant minds who have particular concerns and particular interests, and some of them are in this audience tonight, but we can do it. We can bring our party together. There is a common ground, and I think overwhelmingly what we understand is the need to get this thing done, get it across the line, and then move on. Let's
hear some of those concerns and questions then. We're going to come to the floor, and the first question is from Jeanette Towie. Jeanette, if you could stand up and wait for a microphone to come to you. Jeanette.
Mr Johnson,
Yes.
Lord Ashcroft's polling after the last general election showed that we lost the female vote. How will you go about getting it back again?
Thank you, Jeanette. Well, I think that's absolutely, if you look at what happened in 2017, there's no question that we need to do much, much better with female voters and with women generally. So obviously I will have an agenda that targets female voters not just in our particular policies that are tailored to women, whether it's childcare or promoting women in Parliament and in government, though clearly I will want to do that. But I think you also need to look at policies that, in my experience, resonate particularly strongly with female voters. And I think one that isn't often talked about much, in addition to looking after home ownership and young people and all the rest of it, one thing that isn't talked about much is crime. I really noticed that when I was mayor, my popularity, I'm embarrassed to say, with female voters sort of oscillated, and sometimes I was way more popular with female voters than with male voters, and it just flipped around a bit. And I was trying to wonder why this was. And actually, when I looked at the figures, it seemed to me to be correlated with what we were doing to make London safer. And we had a huge impact in making London safer. And I think as Conservatives, we need to focus on that. And I think there is too much crime at the moment in our country. There are too many drug scams. There's too much knife crime. And what I would like to see is a renewed emphasis on strong policing, as well as backing the police. And we had a policy in London when I took over, shortly after I took over, of stop and search to address knife crime. And I think as a party, we need to be getting back to a state of mind in which we support the police when we ask them to do emotionally difficult things, like stopping a kid and asking him, or it's almost always a him, to produce a knife. And so to get crime down again, and we need to back the police, not only legally, but give them the political cover they need to do their jobs. And I think crime is one thing that would really make a difference.
Just a quick follow-up on that, because the question was actually about how to get women to vote Conservative again. You mentioned about promoting women in government.
I think I gave it.
You mentioned specifically about promoting women in government. Does that include in your cabinet?
Aha. Yes, of course it does, but it would be invidious at this stage when I see so many brilliant female MPs just in this audience. It would be really invidious to me to talk about that subject now, because that will come under the general heading of measuring up the curtains and to be deprecated at this stage.
I think we should move on. Glenda Unger has a question.
Sorry, nothing sexist about measuring up the curtains. That's meant to be you know what I'm talking about.
Glenda Unger, I apologise if I've mispronounced your surname. If you could stand up and we'll get a microphone to you. Is Glenn here? No? Okay, we'll move on. Rebecca Winter. Is Rebecca here? Rebecca.
Hello. If the EU refused to renegotiate the deal, something that is very likely, how are you going to sort out Tory Party Remainers who would rather bring down the government than let us leave with no deal?
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Well, two things. First of all, as I say, I think that the EU will give us a great deal, but the way to get that is to prepare for no deal and to be absolutely resolute and be very positive. And one of the things we're going to do, I was talking about this with Doug Bannister, who runs Dover today, and with Charlie and with others who were there. I think if I'm lucky enough to get this, I think we need to mobilise the country behind a real get-ready campaign. We're going to get ready. And there's a lot of sense behind that, whatever is the outcome on October the 31st, because in the end, in the trade talks that we're going to do, we'll have to start getting ready to change some of the things we do in the long run anyway. So it's an opportunity. Let's take it. Let's get ready. But sorry, just to come to Rebecca's question about the Remainers in Parliament, I don't think, actually, my experience is that it's not Remainers and Leavers anymore. People have different anxieties about different things, and I think overwhelmingly that people just want us to come together and get this thing done. And I think there's a real spirit of compromise now in our party. I want a great Brexit deal, but I'm absolutely willing to go for no deal. And I think that will go for anybody who works in government, and it'll be a great success. And I think what's changed, is that people really can see that the Conservative Party will not recover as a political force in our country. And we're the oldest and most successful political party in the world, but we won't recover for many, many years unless we recover the trust of the electorate and get this thing over the line. So I think that is really the dominant feeling now in the minds of my friends and colleagues in Westminster. And anyway, so I'm optimistic about that.
The Chancellor earlier today, in response to you saying on Tuesday that the cost of no deal would be vanishingly small, he said that's, and I quote, just straightforwardly wrong.
Well, it depends how much you prepare. And yes, it is certainly true that if we take the attitude as if we continually say that no deal is absolutely impossible to deliver and must never happen and all the rest of it, then yes, it is true that no deal would be more disruptive. And if I had to voice a criticism of what has happened in the last 3 years, it is that we haven't really been quite dynamic enough as a country in getting ready. But the more you prepare, the more vigorous you are, the more positive, the more committed you are to getting ready, the less friction, the less disruption there might be. So it depends on the spirit in which you approach these things, I venture to say.
Harry Haythorne, is Harry here? Harry Haythorne?
It's just that. No?
Yes, if you can stand up, please.
It's not Harry Haythorne, but it's somebody else.
Someone disguising themselves as Harry Haythorne. Okay, we'll move on then. Let's see. Julian Ellicott at the back there.
Boris, you yourself have said what a fantastic and committed membership we have. If you become leader, will you give these members a greater say in the running of the party? And if so, how? Yes,
I will. Julian, I think that Dave Cameron and George Osborne, they did some fantastic things for our party. I think they did some wonderful things. My own view is slightly that we became very, very much dependent on financially, on a small group of people. I'm going to throw that thought out there. I don't want in any way to discourage that small group of people from giving even more, but I think what that meant was that we sort of slightly didn't listen to grassroots Conservative supporters and activists in the way that we might have done. So, Julian, I think there is a job now to be done of re-energising Tory democracy. There always used to be, when I was young, I remember under Mrs. Thatcher and others, there were many more elections in the Conservative Party. I'm not saying we didn't have too many, but there were many more, and it is possible to imagine revitalising democracy within the Tory Party itself. And I'm certainly looking at ways we could do that. I'm not convinced about actually electing the party chairman. I can see, might be popular with everybody, but I want to think about that one more profoundly for a while. But I think there is a case for more elections and more direct representation within the Tory Party.
Fiona Baird. Is Fiona here? Yes.
Mr Johnson, given the current manoeuvres by some Tory MPs to get no deal removed from the table, how will you ensure that we can leave with no deal if it becomes the only option?
Well, actually, Fiona, listen to what's really happening in Parliament. Time after time, MPs say that they're going to try to take no deal off the table, and lo and behold, it remains on the table. It's a pretty adhesive sort of table. It's there. It remains an option, and it must remain an option. Don't you think so? It's not where we want to end up. We can do much better than that, but we've got to have that as a basic utensil of negotiation. So we're going to do that. And I think, look at the votes that we have repeatedly in Parliament. They keep trying to take no deal off the table, and there it still is. And I think I think I'm speaking for all the MPs I can see here in this room now. We all agree that that's the way forward. So, look, I think we should be full of optimism and courage about this. We're going to get this thing done, and I think MPs are going to come together to do it.
Duncan Petty.
Boris,
Sir.
would you consider broadening taxes to some foods to help pay for the cost of treating the problems arising from obesity?
Aha, well, thank you very much, Douglas. In fact, I was asked that question, sorry, Duncan, forgive me. I was asked that question, I think in Exeter, or somewhere like that. Were you there? No, you missed that one. And it was about milkshakes. And I said that I would want to see the evidence, frankly, that if you put a tax on milkshakes, it would deter people from eating whatever you do with a milkshake. You eat it or you drink it? You drink it. From drinking so much milkshake, but basically it would stop people being so fat. That's the test for me. Will such a tax actually stop people putting on weight? That's I speak very feelingly about this. Because this is a big issue. Now, if the evidence is there that it works and it can help people, and very often it's the poorest in society that have obesity can be a very, very major health risk in all income groups, but particularly for lower income groups. If it can be shown to work, if it can be shown to deliver the result that its proponents claim, then of course I've got an open mind about it. But what I also said, and what I believe, is I'd much rather we had a world in which the streets were so safe that kids felt able to walk or cycle to school and to play in public and not feel threatened and lose weight that way and take more exercise, because basically it's calories in, calories out. And I would in my ideal world, everybody would take more exercise as well.
Nicholas Fryatt. At the back, please.
Boris. Just quickly on post-Brexit policy. Firstly, animal welfare. It's often the first thing that's traded away in international negotiations. Can you commit to ending the live exports of animals to the continent? Secondly, obviously with the Queen 3 years away from her Platinum Jubilee, what better gift from her to the nation, from the nation than a new Royal Yacht Britannia, and as a post-Brexit weapon in our foreign policy. So what do you make of that? Because I know you've backed it before.
Wow. Well, under no circumstances would we use a new yacht to transport live animals. Obviously, let's be clear about that. But seriously, that is one thing that we will be able to do. But don't bear in mind, and this is very important. One of the reasons that I resigned from the cabinet is because when you look at the detail of what is implied by the current withdrawal agreement, it would make it impossible for us to vary our laws on live transport of animals. As you remember, this is a single market competence, and there's a great deal of legal dispute about whether we would actually, under the withdrawal agreement that has been rejected, whether we would be able to do that. Once we come out properly, we will indeed be able to tell the very small live shipment interest that was no longer possible, and that it was no longer possible to take live animals in great distress and confusion, which is what happens very, very long distances. And some of them, by the way, go from more or less from Scotland to Spain to Africa. I mean, this is a really terrible business for these animals, to North Africa. So we would be able to do that. As for the new Royal Yacht, I mean, I think the crucial thing is that it should be something that Her Majesty herself actually wants, and I have not established that. I don't think we should embarrass her. Let me put it that way, by
imposing a yacht on her that she, do you know what I mean? I think we need to discover somehow, tactfully. Perhaps you have some contacts.
I think we would need to work out whether it was something that would actually be welcome. But I will say that we do have an opportunity, once we get rid of overdue processes, to do much more shipbuilding in this country, and to champion shipbuilding, which I think is a fantastic industry, generates loads of high-tech jobs, and is leading to exports around the world. Shipbuilding, yes. Royal Yacht, up to others above me.
Michael Payne. Gentleman here.
Good evening, Michael Payne, Tunbridge and Malling, and welcome to the home of the Kent County Agricultural Show and Society. In the event of a no-deal Brexit on the 31st of October, what measures would you have put in place to support English and Welsh farmers?
Thank you, Michael. Well, thank you. This is a crucial issue, and indeed, I was just on the phone this afternoon to my friend Michael Gove on that very point. There is a lot of work, as everybody knows, that has already been done, and we will make sure that in the event of a no-deal Brexit or coming out on WTO terms, in the very, very unlikely event that our EU friends decide to impose tariffs, which I think would be absolute folly, but were they really to go ahead with that, then of course we will have export refunds and deficiency payments and farm gate payments and whatever is needed to look after the agricultural sector. And believe me, the funds are there, the plans are there. We will make sure we look after the farmers and the rural interest and British food. And I just remind you that if we are forced by our friends and partners, and I don't think this will be what happens, I don't think it's the right outcome, but if they force us to go down that route, there will be also £39 billion to spend on such interests as the agricultural sector, and that butters a lot of parsnips, so to speak.
John Saunderson. Is John here?
Just there.
Yes.
Good evening, sir. My question, when you're Prime Minister...
Well, we've got a long way to go. We've got a long way to go.
Would you consider allowing a free vote in Parliament on repealing that dreadful bill by Labour on the ban on hunting with dogs?
Well, John, let me just say that whatever people think about this issue, I do not, in all sincerity, with Brexit hanging over us, with the need to get our party back in shape to defeat Jeremy Corbyn, with the need to unite our country, I do not, in all candour, having spent quite a long time in politics, I do not think this is the one to put at the top of our standard as we go into battle.
Alistair Goulden. Is Alistair Goulden here? Oh, no, you thought you might be, but you're not sure. Oh.
Good evening, Boris. Boris, good leaders surround themselves with excellent people and let them get on with the job with a minimum of supervision. Are you prepared to allow your team to deal with the detail while you direct the strategy?
Alistair, the short answer to that question is, of course. But I just want to allay anybody's anxieties. I am a glutton for detail. I'm rather fed up with this constant assertion that I don't do detail. I love detail, but I want you to know that we will also have a fantastic team. I don't think there has been a time in my political lifetime when the Conservative Party has had so many talented people on our benches. I really don't. And if you look at the style of government that I've done, whether it was in City Hall or anywhere, it is absolutely correct to say that I like to have a good team, set the broad direction of where we want to go. And I hope I've been pretty clear tonight about what we want to do with the country to unite it, to promote infrastructure and education and all the other things to bring the country together. But once I've set the broad parameters of what we want to do, yes, I do believe in empowering people to get on and do it. And I also like them, wherever possible, to take the credit and to be happy in their work. Because
James Hollis. Just to the left, my left.
And the blame too, by the way.
Good to see you, Mr. Johnson.
I'll take that. I don't mind. I'll take that.
My question to you is, what positive Conservative message about the merits of free trade and free markets do you wish to convey to young people who are increasingly voting for parties that wish to undermine, if not abolish, both? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, that is such an important question. And that goes to the heart of our mission. We need to find a new language and a new way of projecting popular capitalism and popular conservatism again. And we need to recover our belief in the moral virtue of conservatism and in markets and in wealth creation. And you can't do it if people don't have any share in the economy or in capital. And that's why home ownership is so absolutely vital. And that's why it's a disgrace that owner occupation for under 40s is now lower in this country than it is in France and Germany. And we are the great party of home ownership. That's how Macmillan, Margaret Thatcher, that's how the great conservative prime ministers get elected. And we've got to rediscover that. And that, yes, it does mean increasing the supply of good housing, but it does not mean destroying the green belt. And it does not mean building all over England. And and that is why the programme that I've outlined tonight about uniting the country with great transport infrastructure, with full fibre, expanding connectivity around the country and improving education is so important. Because what we need to do is give people in the 500 towns around the UK, in the rural areas, give them the confidence to know that they will have a good school, and they will have good infrastructure, and they will have fantastic broadband. And therefore, if they're a person of talent and energy and enterprise, they do not need to follow the classic path and move down to London and the southeast of England in order to find a highly paid job. And what we will be able to do is generate economic activity and encourage growth around the country and rebalance, level up the whole of the UK. And that is what we should be doing, and that is the way to address the housing crisis, not just to build homes on brownfield sites with better transport infrastructure, but also to rebalance the economy. And let me stress that even in the southeast, you can build more homes on brownfield sites if you're clever. And at the moment, you can build the right homes in the right place. And at the moment, we are not putting in the infrastructure we need. We have a very inert, invertebrate current mayor of London, not a patch on the old guy, as I may have pointed out before, who is totally failing to deliver Crossrail 2. Crossrail 2 would unleash 200,000 new homes in the Lower Lee Valley, fantastic homes you could build there, all on brownfield sites. You know that area, up in the northeast London, fantastic area to develop. You need good transport infrastructure to do it. We should be putting in good transport infrastructure to liberate brownfield, not building on greenfield or on the green belt. That's the way to do it.
Which makes this next question hopefully quite pertinent then. Joanna James, is Joanna here? Anywhere? I'm looking around. Oh, I can't ask it then. Oh, what a shame. It was a great question.
Well, let's read it out.
Well, while your City of London cycle lanes lie empty, my engineers are failing to meet critical response times. Will you admit that you should have routed the cycle lanes via the privately owned back roads?
They're not privately owned. They're owned by the boroughs. They're not privately owned. Nobody owns them. They're the Queen's Highway. We don't have private roads in London. But what I totally reject that. Let me tell you, we had as everybody may remember, in London, we had a terrible spate of cycle deaths, very largely of female cyclists who found themselves in conflict with lorries that were turning left. And time after time, my staff would be called to appalling scenes of incidents involving cycling fatalities. And we also had more and more people wanting to cycle, because it's a beautiful thing to do. It's the only way to get around. It's fantastic. I mean, I love cycling, okay? I'm not going to hide it from you. And we needed to reduce the deaths because cycling was taking off, and we put in cycle superhighways, and they have actually been a fantastic success. They've been a fantastic success. They have cut KSIs, the number of people who are killed or seriously injured cycling on the streets of London in absolute terms, let alone in relative terms, whilst the number of cyclists has more than doubled. And in a city like London, we've just been talking about obesity. It's absolutely vital to get people on their bicycles and to get them get cars off the roads. And I'm going to stick, and more, I will go further. And I'm possibly sort of I'll worry you now, but I do think that we should be doing more to promote cycling across the whole country. And I think there are things you could do. I think there are, yes, it is. But I think there are things you could do to build fantastic greenways across the whole of the UK, which will, I think, promote cycling from village to village and city to city.
Robin Saunders. Is Robin Saunders here?
Good evening, Boris. Do you consider transforming the UK into the Singapore of Europe to be a viable option?
Thank you, Robin. Well, if by that, do I think that we should be transforming ourselves into some sort of dog-eat-dog, Adam's, dystopian version of capitalism? No, but actually that's not what Singapore is like. Singapore is a very dynamic and very interesting society. I don't think a comparison should be drawn with any particular other economy. We are going to be, by 2050, on current projections, we will be the single most prosperous economy in the whole of Europe. And we're going to get there by a modern conservative approach, which is based on championing wealth creators, cutting taxes where we can, and some taxes, as you know, can be cut whilst increasing yields, such as corporation tax and others. We can do that and get more money in for the exchequer. Encouraging business. I think business rates are too high at the moment. Doing what we can to cut tax for individuals as well. I think that's the right thing for Conservatives to do. What we want is a high wage, low tax economy. And at the same time, championing our public services, whether it's transport, the police, or the NHS. And that is, I think, a winning formula. So what I want our country to be is that just, I said London was the greatest city on earth, and people looked at me as I was a bit, sort of Trumpian. But I think it is the greatest city on earth. It is. By many objective standards, it is. I want the UK to be the greatest place to be. And it can be, and it is. And we should be more positive about our country and what it can achieve. It doesn't have to be like Singapore or anywhere else. It can simply be the greatest place to be, to raise a family, to send your kids to school, have a party, whatever.
Tom Cannon.
Evening, Boris. How will you develop our post-Brexit relationships with Canada, Australia and New Zealand? What specific initiatives will you pursue? And how will you promote them to the British public as an advantage of Brexit?
Well, our relations with Canada, Australia and New Zealand are already fantastically close. When I remember proposing ages ago that there should be a sort of Five Eyes visa, and didn't find favour with the Home Office of the time, as far as I can remember. But I think people don't realise quite how close those relationships are, particularly on intelligence and security and on defence. I was up in Govan the other day looking at the building of these incredible new frigates. That we're selling 9 of them to Australia. We're selling them to Canada as well. We're going to sell them to New Zealand. We just got to sell them to Donald Trump, and we've done all 5 of the Five Eyes. And that is a measure, and that business is going to generate jobs for young people in Glasgow, literally for the next generation, for decades to come. There is a pipeline of fantastic work because of the closeness of our relationships with Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. So that it is an area that is full of possibilities, and we should also, by the way, be championing our links with the Commonwealth countries, 53 Commonwealth countries, whose growth rates, many of them, far surpass the growth rates of the EU. We have massive global opportunities, and we should seize them now.
I'm afraid that we are out of time. I'm We didn't have time to get to other audience questions, but thank you for those questions as well to Boris, and thank you very much, Boris Johnson.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, don't go anywhere. We move very, very swiftly on to the next candidate, of course. So, the next candidate to speak to you will be Jeremy Hunt, but before we hear from Mr. Hunt, let's hear from his campaign team.
The most striking quality about Jeremy Hunt was his unwavering commitment to get results. I think perhaps part of that is to do with his background in business. No matter what the obstacles were, he was prepared to push through them. He wanted to get results.
I've seen him deliver on the things that matter most to the British people. He has credibility from all sides. I trust him on Brexit.
I've known Jeremy for 40 years, and about 25 of those years we've worked together, setting up various businesses. Those early days were absolutely about his determination and grit. He would never give up.
When I first met Jeremy, I realised he was a man who actually was committed to making a difference.
In 2008, I lost my baby son Joshua as a consequence of serious failures in his care during my campaign to kind of uncover the truth about what happened. I was struggling to be heard, and Jeremy really listened and treated me as a grieving dad rather than a troublemaker. I knew that this was somebody who was going to change things.
My mum died quite tragically in poor care in Mid-Souths. Jeremy was incredibly kind. He saw the bereaved daughter behind the campaigner, and he saw it was people that mattered.
I have known Jeremy Hunt since the early 2000s. He and his business partner started funding the education of children living with HIV in our community-based programme. Jeremy's generosity was sensed by us all.
That desire to make a difference really drives him, and it's never been about him. It's always been about what he can do to help others.
The work he's done will save the lives of countless babies, and other families will not have to go through the kind of pain that we did.
People often underestimate Jeremy because he comes across as being such a polite and generous and nice person, and he is. But I remember hearing him warning the EU not to mistake British politeness for British weakness, and I thought that just about sums him up.
I was pessimistic about the London Olympics. I thought, we could mess this up. I remember talking to Jeremy in the build-up. He said, no, we're a great country. We can do this if we have the right mindset. The delivery was outstanding. It also had this element of fun. I know that Jeremy was very involved in getting that balance right.
He believes in Britain as a force for good in the world. He's shown strong values at the FCO and consistently good judgment.
Negotiating, toughing it out when things get really difficult, keeping going, having a vision. Those are the skills that we need in a Prime Minister.
He's a unifier. He's somebody who can reach out to different groups of people.
My dad always taught me that politics should be about making a difference in ordinary people's lives. And Jeremy made a huge difference to our lives. He gave us hope, and that for me is the main thing, that he gave us hope in some very, very dark days.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jeremy Hunt.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Boris. Fantastic warm-up act. Now we've got the show, and it's great to be in the Garden of England. As Foreign Secretary, I have the use of Chevening, so I have my own garden in Kent, and I have noticed that your gardens here are slightly bigger than our gardens in Surrey. But we are so lucky to have the use of a beautiful house, and I am here to tell you about the exciting things that I want to change as Prime Minister, but with some apprehension, because I discovered that the Mayor of Maidstone was the person who gave the death penalty to Charles I. And I'm rather hoping that you will be a bit more generous to the runner-up in this contest, because I want Boris in my cabinet. Now, to govern is to choose, and I have 4 priorities as Prime Minister. I'm going to tell them all to you, but we can't do any of them without Brexit.
And so the question is, what is the quickest way to leave the European Union? What is the quickest way? And when it comes to no deal, Boris and I have actually very similar position. We're both prepared to leave without a deal if we can't get one. We're both prepared to leave on the 31st of October. We both have to deal with the risk of Parliament blocking no deal. And because of that risk, I have been more careful about my words on the 31st of October, because as Prime Minister, I will only promise what I know I can deliver. But the quickest way to leave the European Union is to send to Brussels a Prime Minister who can negotiate a deal that will get through Parliament. And why am I that person? Folks, if you choose me, I'm going to tell you something you haven't heard yet. I will be the first Prime Minister who has a background as an entrepreneur. I'm going to use that line more often. And what is it that entrepreneurs do? Just put your hands up for a moment if you've set up your own business. And just look around, because this is incredible. This is our Conservative Party. We are the party of doers, wealth creators, job creators, and this is what is so fantastic. And what we do as entrepreneurs, we negotiate with our suppliers, with our customers, our contracts, our leases, we negotiate. And that is what I'm going to do for our country as we deliver Brexit. And then we're going to have those really exciting things that we can do about our future. Now, as someone who set up their own business, I want to fire up our economy, help young people do what I did, turn us into the most pro-growth, pro-enterprise, pro-business economy in Europe. What's our opportunity? Well, in 10 years' time, we won't be talking about Brexit, I hope. We will be talking about driverless cars and our Amazon delivery coming by drone and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence. We in this country, with the top universities in the world, with more tech and entrepreneurs, more medicines being developed, we could be the world's next Silicon Valley. And why does that matter? On the cusp of all these changes in technology, it will set this country up for the 21st century. We would park an economic jumbo jet on Europe's doorstep. And in any trade negotiations, they will need us every bit as much as we need them. And that's what we want, ladies and gentlemen. Number two, I'm the Foreign Secretary who wants our country to walk tall in the world. And you know, weren't the Royal Navy fantastic yesterday protecting British ships in the Gulf of Arabia? I'm going to put more money into our armed forces, not just because my dad was in the Navy all his life, but that may be one of the reasons, but a much more important one is because the world is becoming more dangerous. And most importantly, at the point of Brexit, I want the world to know that this special country that has always stood up for democratic values, for the security that you need in the world, this country is strong and confident, its voice is loud, and we will stand up for our values, won't we, ladies and gentlemen? That's what we're going to do. Now, number three, we have got as Conservatives not just to have an economic mission. You saw those hands go up, all the wealth creators. Everyone knows we can do that stuff, but we've got to have a social mission so that people understand our compassionate values. And I'd be the first Prime Minister who's been responsible for our NHS, an enormous privilege. But actually, I want our social mission to be education. Still in our country, nearly a quarter of primary school leavers can't read or write properly. And we are the party of opportunity for everyone. We want there to be a ladder for every young person to climb. I want us to be the party, the Conservative government, that ends the scourge of illiteracy in our society. And the first rung on that ladder is to be able to read. And I want us to be able to promise every single young person in our country, we will make sure you get onto that first ladder, because we are the party of opportunity. And then my last priority. This is actually a political one. I promise you as Conservative Party leader, I will not take us into an election until we've got more young people to vote Conservative. We can't be the party of aspiration if the most aspirational people aren't supporting us. And I've got a whole lot of policies, we maybe talk about them later, for young people. But there's a particular reason, and that is because the heart of Corbyn's success at the last election were his fake promises to young people. And we have got to win them back. And that's what we're going to do, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it. Because if we ignore the threat of Corbyn, we ignore the most ruthless, dangerous, anti-Western, anti-British, hard-left Labour Party we have ever had in our history, the biggest danger to our country. And faced with that threat, faced with that left-wing populist, we could choose our own populist, or we could do better. We could choose our own Jeremy. And this is a Jeremy who will win the argument for enterprise, for aspiration, for true social justice. Ladies and gentlemen, get this big moment in our history wrong, and we could have no Conservative government, no Brexit, maybe even no Conservative Party. But get it right, and we can deliver Brexit, unite our party, unleash the extraordinary potential of our country, and send Corbyn packing. And that's what I'm going to do. Thank you. But you look at what's happening in the world, the threat to British shipping that we've seen this week, and the world is becoming more dangerous. And so we have to be there, absolutely.
I'm talking about slightly more recent events, though, namely the resignation of Sir Kim Darroch. And I'm wondering whether you think the debacle over that has diminished the office of the Prime Minister before you've even potentially stepped foot in it.
I don't think it's diminished the office of the Prime Minister. What I'm concerned about is that one of our top diplomats, and by the way, we have, I think, the best diplomatic service in the world, and they make our country strong and influential. And he was doing his job, which was to give frank opinions, his own opinions about the political situation in the country he was serving in. And when he did that, there was a very unfortunate leak, and he came under attack. And I wish he was still in his job, because he is a fine diplomat, and he should still be there today, and I think it's a great shame he isn't.
Have we, as a country, been bullied into submission?
No, I made it very clear that I would back him to the hilt, and if I become Prime Minister, I would have wanted him to stay. So I think it's very sad that he didn't, but I wrote to every single diplomat in the Foreign Office today, and I said to them, you must carry on telling us your frank opinions just in the way you did before, and I will always, as Foreign Secretary, back you to the hilt if you do that, because that is your job, and that is what is brilliant about our Foreign and Commonwealth Office.
There's been some questions over the political neutrality of the civil service. If you became Prime Minister, how would you then boost morale amongst civil servants in light of that attack?
Well, we actually have, you know, a fine civil service, and we were the country that invented the idea of a modern, politically neutral civil service. And I've always found them excellent to work with, and I've always found that whatever their own personal political views, they put them on one side because they think their duty is to serve the government of the day. So how do we boost their morale? I think it's by telling them that if they do the right thing, we've always got their back. And you know, when I was health secretary, we had to do lots of difficult things in the NHS to make the NHS safer, and I was very proud that we, you know, Medway Hospital, I can see Ray Chishti in the front row, we got that out of special measures. It was a long process. I was really proud to do that, but difficult reforms, you've got to back people when they do what you ask them to do, and that's what I'd do.
At the head-to-head debate on Tuesday, you used the phrase peddling optimism when describing Boris Johnson. I'm wondering if you regret that.
No, but I will say this. Optimism is a great thing. And I love Boris for his optimism. But it's got to be optimism grounded in reality. It's got to be optimism where you can actually deliver what you're promising. And the truth is, you can't deliver Brexit on a wing and a prayer. He called me Mr. Details Man. You know, you do need details. These agreements that we have with the European Union are full of difficult details. Get any one of them wrong, and those are people's jobs. And that's why I'm going to deliver the best deal for Britain.
But is there potentially a conflict between what the party wants? Perhaps the party wants an optimist, but the country needs a realist.
I think the party and the country want an optimist, but an optimist who is going to promise what we really can deliver. Now, look, let's cut to the chase here, Hannah. Both Boris and I have a parliament that is going to try very hard, is trying right now to block a no-deal Brexit. Now, I haven't made this absolute guarantee on the 31st of October, not because I don't want to leave on the 31st of October, because I know that Parliament, which took no deal off the table in March, is trying to do so again. And I don't want the first thing that happens as Prime Minister is for people to feel betrayed if Parliament does something out of my control. Now, that is a judgment that I've made because I think, you know, it's very important as Prime Minister that you keep people's confidence. And sometimes that means telling people things that they don't want to hear. That's what I had to do as Health Secretary a lot. I had to deliver very uncomfortable messages because we're so proud of the NHS. It gave me 3 beautiful children. But when I was running the NHS, we had some terrible tragedies at Midstaffs and Morecambe Bay and other hospitals, and I had to confront the NHS with the fact that some terrible things were happening, and then we changed, and it got better and safer, and that is not me, it's brilliant doctors and nurses doing their job, but I think that's real leadership.
How would you ensure that Kent is ready for a potential cliff-edge no-deal Brexit?
Well, you are on the front line in Kent. And, you know, we have a lot of discussions about how we stop the M20 turning into a lorry car park. And you've got a huge farming community in Kent. So let me tell you, first of all, government preparations are in a much better state than they were a year ago. And I am confident that we will be able to maintain smooth flow through our ports. That may be something I live to regret saying, but I actually do believe that we've made enormous progress in that respect. Where we've made less progress is preparing businesses. And, you know, there's no point pretending that no deal, the imposition of 40% tariffs on lamb, for example, or 11% tariffs on steel products when I go to factories in the Midlands, this is an external shock. Now, I went to a factory in Kidderminster and, you know, 40 million turnover, 1.5 million profits, 11% tariff on the steel wheels that they make would wipe out their profits instantly. He said, you know, the guy who runs that factory said it would close us down. And so how do you stop that factory closing down? By supporting them. So that's why I've said I will cut corporation tax to 12.5%, one of the very lowest in Europe. Because I want to support businesses and farmers, I've put aside £6 billion for the farming and fishing communities to help them change their business model. This is not a subsidy for the tariffs, because that's illegal. It is helping them giving them 2 or 3 years of protection so that they can change their business model to survive in a world with tariffs.
Michael Portillo, former Tory minister, said, and I quote, "The only way this Brexit thing can possibly be resolved is by negotiation in which charm is going to be the only weapon." Do you agree?
I think we have to accept that there are many MPs, including some in our own party, who will do everything, including voting against their own government, to stop a no-deal Brexit. So the safest and quickest way to leave is to negotiate a deal. And I think that does need charm. I think that, you know, in a business negotiation, you don't sign a deal with someone you don't trust. So you have to have that rapport, but you also have to be prepared to deliver difficult messages to people that you have a friendly relationship with. And I think my track record as Foreign Secretary, where I wasn't planning it this way, but I had to deliver a difficult message to President Trump a couple of days ago, and I did it to the Chinese government over what was happening in Hong Kong. And I think my track record is that I am prepared to deliver difficult messages to friends when it's in the British national interest.
But is charm in your arsenal?
Well, I like to think it is, Hannah. I like to think it is. Hang on, we've
Okay, final question then. What would be the one thing that you would say to party members gathered here today, or those listening around the country, who still maybe haven't heard enough to convince them of your candidacy? Anything other than entrepreneur?
Have I not used that one? No, okay. Well, obviously that's one. Look, the big issue is Brexit, and the big risk we have is if we approach Brexit in a headstrong way, we'll end up not with Brexit but with an election. And there is a big risk with that of not a Conservative Prime Minister but a Marxist Prime Minister. So this is a situation where choosing someone who can pick our way through Brexit, get the details right, negotiate that deal, but make careful preparations for no deal in case that doesn't work. This is truly the quickest way that we will deliver Brexit. So I think, you know, I say this with some irony, but I think, you know, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Steve Baker, who are our most passionate Brexiteers, the best person, the best Prime Minister for them is actually Jeremy Hunt. I will deliver their Brexit with more certainty because of the approach that I'll take to this problem.
Okay, thank you. It's time for questions from the floor. Derek Ross. Is Derek Ross here? If you could stand up. Yes, at the back.
Good evening, Jeremy. If you're a good boy and you do become First Lord of the Treasury, in your previous experience with the National Health Service, can we do something with the National Care Service for people who, you know, don't want to lose their home, give up their savings, everything they work for? Sort of a personal experience, my gran, everything went in care fees, and then in the end we subsidised everything. That would be a great thing.
Derek, yeah, look, I agree. My gran lived till she was 100, and I was actually very close to her. And, you know, I remember those last few months, which are really pretty unpleasant when you're starting to lose your different bodily functions. She kept her mind until the end, which was a blessing. But I think as Conservatives, we're the party that cares about all the generations, and we want every single older person to be treated with dignity and respect. And we don't want people to have to lose their life savings because of huge care costs. So what is the solution? First of all, we do need to help councils with more funding. I think that's one of the areas where austerity went further than we were planning when we made those difficult cuts in 2010. Secondly, we need to encourage personal responsibility. So the deal I would offer is this. If, as a young person, just like you save for your pension, you put aside a little bit extra every month for your care costs at the very end of your life, and we can make it really smooth and simple so that it just feels part of the process of saving for your pension. If you're prepared to do the right thing, then we should back you by saying you won't lose your savings, you won't lose your house, you've done the right thing, and as Conservatives we support you.
Angela Richardson.
Good evening, Mr. Hunt. After we leave the EU, there may be a short-lived economic downturn. Spending pledges have been made with the hard-won fiscal headroom created. If it came down to a choice, which would you prioritise? Tax cuts or investment in public services?
Thank you, Angela. And look, first of all, we mustn't lose our reputation for fiscal responsibility. It's very important. You know, I know the pain. You know, my first cabinet job, I had to make 25% cuts. It was really, really tough. And that was because of Labour irresponsibility, which made the financial crisis far worse than it might have been for our country. So we mustn't lose that. And my rule is that I will continue to reduce debt as a proportion of GDP over the cycle so that we are reducing debt for future generations, not increasing it, which I think is the Conservative thing to do. Why? The biggest spending pledge that I've made, which I'll make deal or no deal, is a radical cut to corporation tax to Irish levels. And some of you may wonder why I have not chosen a more popular way to spend money, because you know, this isn't the thing that you get on the doorstep. Please, can you cut corporation tax? I accept that. The reason is because as Conservatives, we want to grow the size of the cake. If we do what Trump did in America with his business tax cuts, if we got our growth rate from 1.5% now to 3%, which is what they have in the US, that would be an extra £20 billion that we could spend on either tax cuts or public services. And I think we need to do a mixture. People need to know that the public services are safe with the Conservatives, that we'll spend money on our NHS and social care system and more police numbers, but they also need to know that we are bringing down taxes. And I would choose the lower paid first, because I think we have to recognise that the cost of living is a big issue for the electorate, but that's how I would approach it, grow the cake.
Lena Dimitri. Is Lena Dimitri here? Yes, to the far left, just 5 or 6 rows back. Someone's running, don't worry.
Mr. Hunt, how committed are you to simplifying the tax system by scrapping the inheritance tax, please, as well as reducing the stamp duty on property?
Thank you, Alina. I knew someone was going to ask me a question I didn't want to have to answer. But I personally think that the stamp duty changes have had a very bad effect on the housing market. And I also think that there's something inherently unfair about inheritance tax, given that you are paying tax on money that you have already paid tax on. And one of the fundamental oh dear, because now I'm coming to the bad news, which is that much as I would like to do something about those taxes, Elena, I'm going to start with those big cuts in corporation tax to fire up the economy, because then I think you create the room to do all sorts of big tax reforms. But I remember Nigel Lawson, every budget he scrapped a tax. And I thought that was a very good way to go. I think simplicity in the tax system, as someone who ran their own business, you know, that bureaucracy can be an absolute nightmare. So simplicity is a great thing. But what we need to do is to fire up the economy so we've got the headroom to make those changes.
Andrew Smith. Andrew Smith.
Thank you for taking my question. It's true that police have had numbers cut, but from experience, that's only half the story. They've been suffocated by bureaucracy and red tape. How will you reduce that and free up officers and backroom staff?
Thank you, Andrew. So, first of all, if you said to me, having been in that cabinet in 2010, which had to make those very painful cuts in public spending, the biggest we've ever made, I would say the two areas where they went further than we anticipated at the time, with the benefit of hindsight, are actually police numbers and social care. And so those are the two areas which I think are a priority for me. So I do think we need to do something about overall police numbers. But when it comes to things like knife crime, part of it is also the issue around bureaucracy. And I think that I support Sajid Javid's view that we need to relook at the stop and search powers, which I think have prevented police from sometimes using their judgment. Now, we all know that it's very important that judgment is not prejudice. But as I found in the NHS, if you hamstring people with bureaucracy, then the doctors on the front line aren't able to do the right thing for patients. And I think that has gone too far in parts of the police service. The one thing as well I'd say is that IT in the police service is almost as bad as IT in the NHS. And I think we need to have a real crack at that.
Fiona Archbold. Yes, just in the middle there. If you wouldn't mind just waiting for the microphone.
Hi. Do you think the change in EU leadership, where Charles Michel is replacing Tusk as European Council President, and probably Ursula von der Leyen is going to be President of the European Commission, is this a negative, a positive, or totally irrelevant to Brexit?
I think it's a relief that Michel Barnier is not the new President of the European Commission. But I will say that I haven't met Ursula von der Leyen, but I've heard good things about her. And my experience of working with members of the German government, of which she was a part, is that they sincerely want to find a way through the Brexit maze. And so I think, given that she was Defence Minister, she will understand the incredibly important role that Britain has played in Europe's security and defence. So I think there is a possibility for a really positive relationship with her, and that is what I would seek to do as Prime Minister. I don't think this is going to be easy, but I don't think it's impossible either. And I've said before, I think there is a deal to be done there if we get the tone right in the way that we deal with them, because they are, in many ways, they have misunderstood us as much as we've misunderstood them. And so I think if we get this right, we can find a way through it.
Geoffrey Walsh. Is Geoffrey here? At the very back.
Good evening. I think you've already indicated that you believe it's the government's responsibility to support our oldest and most vulnerable people. So as Prime Minister, will you keep the party's manifesto pledge to protect pensioner benefits and guarantee as a government to fund the free TV licence?
Geoffrey, look, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think about this, and I hope I don't lose too many votes, but I'm going to be honest with you and say that free TV licences for the over 75s, when it comes to well-off people, isn't my top priority. However, it's a manifesto pledge. So I will honour that manifesto pledge, because we have to be a party that honours our pledges. We said we would protect pensioner benefits for this Parliament, so we must protect them.
Paul Watts. Paul Watts. Is Paul Watts here? No? Yes? Yes.
Evening, Mr. Hunt.
Good evening.
The world is kind of moving at breakneck speed towards changing of transportation systems to electrics. So cars, planes, trains obviously, but even boats, ferries. So what are you going to do to make Britain at the forefront of this and all high-tech stuff?
Well, thank you, Paul. As I mentioned in my speech earlier, I think our big opportunity is to become the world's next Silicon Valley, and I think at the start of the nearly the start of the 21st century, it's worth us remembering that the thing that was the making of this country into one of the greatest countries in the world was the fact that we were the first country to have the first industrial revolution. That started in this country. And we're now on what's called the fourth industrial revolution, all these big changes. And because of our great inventiveness and creativity, we could be the first, or one of the very first to do that. So that would be my big play for our country to go for that. But you asked about electric cars. I think, unfortunately, we are going to have to be digging up quite a lot of roads to deliver fibre to the home so that we all have 1 gigabyte fibre connections to our homes over the next few years. My proposal would be in our towns and cities where we have on-street parking, why don't we put in electric car charging points at the same time as we dig up the roads, not at another time, so that we can move our towns and cities to being all electric car. I'm actually looking at my wife in the front row. She wanted to buy an electric car in London, but we didn't because we didn't know where we could charge it. And so I think this would be a great way that we could promise to people that we would have pollution-free cities in a decade, all electric cars in a decade, if we could get those charging networks working. And so that would be my plan.
George Whiteside. George Whiteside, over to the far right. Just waiting for a microphone. Do we just wait for a microphone, please, sir?
I'll give you the chance to explain this one again. How do you intend to fund the proposed tax cuts and spending handouts? Details, please.
Good question, George, and you're right to ask it because none of us should be in the business of promising stuff that we can't deliver. So at the moment, under Philip Hammond's rules, we have the Treasury figures about £26 billion of headroom. That's money that we could use for tax cuts or spending increases and still carry on reducing our national debt. My biggest promise is corporation tax. Cutting that is, the IFS say that's £13 billion. You asked for details. We would get over time about half of that back through growth in the economy that you get through businesses. And the other promises I've made, for example, the increase to defence spending, which is £15 billion over 5 years, I have said if we had a no-deal Brexit, those promises would take longer to deliver because we would have to divert some of that money to supporting farmers and the fishing community and small businesses to help them weather the storm of a no-deal Brexit. So I hope we don't come to that, but I'm being honest with people that the non-business tax cuts would wait longer if we had that no-deal Brexit.
Beverly Palmer. Yes, just here. Someone's coming.
Thank you. If the referendum was being held tomorrow, how would you vote, Remain or Leave? And give 3 reasons why you would vote for your choice.
Good. Okay, well, I can actually give you 2. I would vote Leave. And the reason I voted Remain before, as I'm sure you know, because I believed the forecast that said that the moment that we voted to leave the EU, the economy would crash, house prices would fall, share prices would fall, we'd have to have emergency budget, cutting funding for the NHS. You may remember some quite senior people in our party were saying those things, and I was health secretary at the time, and I was concerned about the impact on the budget. Those forecasts turned out not to be true. Our economy, our British economy, turned out to be much, much more resilient. And so that is why I'm absolutely confident we can make a terrific success of Brexit. But there's another reason why. And that is that I'm like millions of people who voted Remain who are Democrats. And, you know, I go around the world and people have a whole lot more respect for Britain than we sometimes have for ourselves. And the reason is because we are one of the oldest, greatest democracies on the planet. And people know the political establishment didn't want to leave the EU. So they're looking at us and they're saying, are you really going to do this? Because we know that you guys didn't vote for it. And we have to look at them and say, yes, because we're a great democracy in our country. People like me do what people like you tell us to do. That is part of our DNA in Britain. And so we have to show the world, and more importantly, we have to show that we're not just going to leave, but we're going to make it an absolutely terrific success. And that's what we're going to do.
Prothero. Anthony Prothero. Yes, just proceed towards...
Good evening.
Anthony.
You've touched on increasing spending on defence, which is good news. And Boris has said he wants to reinvigorate shipbuilding in our ever-increasing collection of dormant shipyards. Which brings me around to my question. So, steel in the UK is on its knees. China's steel is of much poorer quality, with major thermal shortcomings. If you become Prime Minister, can you assure us that our armed forces will not have to rely on foreign steel? And if so, how would you deliver this without waiting for global warming to change the problem?
Congratulations on asking a question that I have not yet been asked before. Look, I'm not someone who believes that we should stop importing things from other countries, but I do make an exception for that on defence, because I think on defence things you do need to have an element of self-security and self-sufficiency for very obvious reasons. And I certainly think, and I would not necessarily put steel at the top of that list, but I would use things like our communications infrastructure. We need to make sure that we're not dependent on other countries for things like our 5G network. But when it comes to how you deal with the issue of imported steel, the real way to do this is to make British companies competitive. And that is by making sure that we have the most competitive business taxes in the world, and also making sure that we have the most highly skilled workforce in the world. Germany has an absolutely formidable manufacturing sector, but they don't have lower costs than the UK. What they have is higher productivity. They have a better trained workforce. That pains me to say it. So the way that we deal with your question, the way we make our steel factories competitive, is by investing in those skills. And when I talked about illiteracy, my broader education vision is actually to do something about the 50% of school leavers who don't go to university. I think every single one of them, like in Germany, like in Switzerland, should leave with a rigorous technical qualification so that they can get a decently paid job and so that our manufacturers can be highly competitive.
Joseph Casey. Joseph Casey. Is Joseph Casey here? I'm scanning the room. If not, we'll move on. Andrew Hobart. Is Andrew Hobart here? Yes.
Hello, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm an NHS consultant. Jeremy, do you agree that effective marginal tax rates of more than 50% disincentivise work and are fundamentally wrong? And if so, would you commit to moving towards reforming existing tax rules, such as Gordon Brown's tapered withdrawal of the personal allowance and George Osborne's tapered withdrawal of the annual pensions allowance?
Well, Andrew, I'll tell you, there's something very specific that we're getting wrong when it comes to NHS consultants and GPs, which is the pension rules that mean that it pays GPs to retire early and sell themselves back to the NHS as locums at the same time as claiming their pension, and then we're paying twice, and it's completely nuts. I do want to be honest with you. Of course, I would like to reduce tax rates for higher rate taxpayers and for all taxpayers, because we are the party of enterprise. And it was a very big moment when Geoffrey Howe reduced the top rate of tax from 98% under Labour to 60%, and Nigel Lawson then brought it down to 40%, and that changed the whole climate of our country. But my priority for tax cuts would be for people on lower incomes, for two reasons. First of all, because it is very expensive trying to live in London on a salary of £25,000, and lots of people do, and as Conservatives we need to recognise that. But secondly, because we need to send the right signal about our values as a party. So if the first taxes we cut were for the wealthiest people, that would feed the Corbyn narrative of us being the party of the rich, and we're not. We're the party of everyone. We always have been, and we always will be.
Is Ben Fleury here? Yes, far left, just with the cap on the side.
Good evening, Jeremy. In some years' time, when you look back on your career, if you had to pick one, what would be your proudest achievement? Delivering Brexit on the 31st of October or defeating Jeremy Corbyn at the next general election?
Oh, well, look, we have to do both. And it's I don't want to, Ben, it's a brilliant question to ask me to choose. But the truth is that if we don't deliver Brexit, Corbyn is in Downing Street. So we've absolutely got to deliver Brexit. And we have got to defeat Corbyn because he's the most dangerous Labour leader that we've had. But you know, the difference between Conservatives and Labour, and I felt this very strongly in the Tony Blair years, for most Labour politicians, the only reason they were in politics was to defeat the Tories, as they saw it. Conservatives have a vision. And for us, what we care about is what we change. And I want us to be able to stay in power for long enough to fire up our economy, to deal with big social problems, to deal with what we've been talking about with the armed forces, to do all those kinds of things. And the thing I like about your question is you said, what would be your proudest achievement? I've always thought that in politics, don't judge yourself by how popular you are at the time. Judge yourself by how popular you are 5 years after you've left office. And people make the cool, dispassionate judgment as to whether you actually change things for the better. And I think we're the party that believes that.
Tony Reid. Tony Reid. At the back there. Can you see?
Good evening. Bearing in mind the recent voting defeats in the House of Commons, what changes to the proposals that you may bring will result in a majority of MPs voting for any deal that you may present to the House?
Thank you, Tony, and well done for keeping your jacket on in this stifling heat. The answer is we have to learn from what went wrong the last time. And unfortunately, the reason the EU stopped giving concessions to us in the negotiations was that they didn't believe that Theresa May would be able to deliver Parliament for any agreement that was made, so they thought it just wasn't worth making the concessions. So how do we get around that? I've said in my negotiating team, I would have the DUP in the team, I would have the ERG, who are the sort of Brexit purists in our own party, I'd have Scottish Conservatives and Welsh Conservatives, because we must remember the union and the fragility of the union. By putting that slightly larger group of people in our negotiating team, I would be demonstrating that any proposal that we made to the EU is one that we can actually deliver through Parliament. And so we will not be proposing the backstop. We know that won't get through Parliament. And we will be proposing a different solution based on the use of technology on the Irish border. And I think you can do it with existing technology, given the work that people like Greg Hands and Nicky Morgan have been doing. So that would be my approach.
John Hopkins. Oh, just in the sort of to the left.
Yeah, good evening. In nearly 2 hours, nobody's mentioned the name of Nigel Farage. Is Nigel forever consigned to Siberia, or is there a way of bringing him into the fold for the benefit of the country?
Very important question, John. And the reason that I don't advocate a deal with Nigel Farage is because he wants a no-deal Brexit right away. And I think it would be infinitely better for our businesses, for our farmers, for our union, if we negotiated a deal. I'm willing to leave without a deal if it's the only way to leave, and I'm willing to leave by the end of October. But I think it would be better for our country to get a deal if we possibly could, and better for our party as well. The only way to defeat the Brexit party is to Brexit, and Brexit as quickly as we can. And I think if we can get a deal, negotiate a deal, that is the quickest way. But if it's no deal, then the way to do it is to prepare properly for no deal so that we minimise the adverse impacts.
Clifford Palmer. Is Clifford Palmer? No. Yes? Yes.
Hi. There are many MPs and the Chancellor doing all they can to betray our democratic vote to leave the EU. Will you have the courage to sack them from the Cabinet and deliver on the people's democratic vote?
Well, yes, I was about to give you that answer. I think I've been doing quite well at giving straight answers to straight questions tonight. And the answer is that everyone in my cabinet will have to sign up to the fact that we are leaving the EU. And if we can't get a deal quickly, we will leave without a deal because we have to honour the democratic referendum result. So the answer is yes.
Final question from Michael Fair. Michael Fair, if Michael's here.
Good evening, Jeremy. How will you respond to the statements by Remainers and sadly most of the media that a no-deal Brexit leads to chaos, catastrophic results, huge job losses, economic contraction, when all the evidence seems to point to the fact that it is not quite as bad as people are pointing, and preparations are being made? So in other words, you know, can you also not only peddle optimism, but also articulate some facts?
Very good question, Michael. And let me give you some facts on that, because I had a conversation with the Governor of the Bank of England, and the assessment that they have made, given the fact that our preparations have actually got a lot better for no deal in the last few months compared to where they were a year ago, is that you would potentially be looking over an 18-month period at growth in GDP 2% less than would otherwise have been the case. So we're growing at 1.5%, so there could be a small contraction in GDP to take us into negative territory. We should never minimize any contraction in GDP, but we should also recognize that we have coped with bigger contractions than that in the past. So I think the answer to your question is not to say there aren't risks with no deal, but if that is the way we show that we really are a democracy, if we make the right preparations, then we can make sure that we get through a no deal, and it's a terrific success. And as this is the last question I'm going to answer tonight, I just want to do something that I haven't properly done, which is ask you to give a very big thank you to Hannah, because she's heard some of these answers before as we've done the round. So thank you very much, Hannah.
We are actually out of time now. Thank you for all your questions. Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thank you all so much. I hope you've heard some information that will help you make this crucial decision. Thank you.